Hi, thanks for joining. Please make sure you subscribe to follow us on all the various platforms here on the podcast, as well as on YouTube. The stuff we write on Substack, as well as quick takes on Instagram and on Threads. If you're enjoying what we're putting out there, please make sure you're sharing with all your friends and family. And if you have questions or comments about the stuff we're putting out there, please make sure you leave them in comments to us. We'd be more than happy to cover them in future talks. The discussion today is going to look at and relate to a project that hopes to empower kids to work against bullying through storytelling and through resources that we're developing for educators. We're hoping to get some support to help us with this endeavor to make a real difference. And we have a link to the GoFundMe project that is in the description. With the amount of time that children and adolescents spend in school, we need to start to look at how we might be able to make schools a wellness oasis. A discussion here, we're going to revisit some of the previous talking points we've had as it relates to some of the research we've looked at in terms of bias projections and bias modeling, in terms of how educators can model pro-health behaviors, way in which children can interact with each other to learn about healthy living and healthy lifestyles. The ongoing discussion that we look at is going to hopefully try to counter a lot of social pressures that children and adolescents have as it relates to exercise, as it relates to diet, and as it relates to body composition. So how can we leverage schools to develop healthy kids and so much more? Well, let's talk about that.
Warning. The following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard, or believed to be true, about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy.
What we're really talking about is we're talking about establishing a pro-health attitude, a pro-health mentality within the schools. And I understand it's something where it may seem like a burden to educators, where we're somehow lumping another task that they're expected to somehow accomplish within the school day by teaching about nutrition, by teaching about exercise, by teaching about health, even though it's not their specialty, their expertise. It's about modeling. And when we start looking at this idea about how to become pro-health and how to establish a wellness oasis or utilize the schools to develop healthy kids, it's about how do the educators, how do the on-site administrators, how do the teachers, how do all of the other employees, how do all of the other individuals, how does everybody that's associated with the school site project a healthy attitude? And how do they counter a lot of the nonsense that comes into the minds of the kids who get exposed to a lot of the misconceptions, misinformation, disinformation campaigns through all of the social media feeds, through all of the internet feeds, through all of the YouTube videos, through everything they get exposed to? How can we utilize the educational environment in order to educate both the child as well as the parent in an attempt to change some of those cogwheels within the complex interactions of the social environmental factors that have an impact on both body composition as well as overall health, or overall health as well as body composition, depending upon how you want to look at the connection between those 2 points. This is where we have to start looking at the number one issue that's going to happen between the kids at the school site, whether they are elementary school kids or high school kids or junior high school kids. And that's the issue of peer pressure, the need to fit in within the group, where you're going to see changes, you're going to see differences in terms of behavior modifications, in terms of behaviors, in terms of selection towards specific activities, in terms of the need to eat or not eat, in some cases, within the school site based off of the various styles of peer pressure that can exist. This is where we hear stories all the time within the sports medicine community about the athlete skipping meals, about the cheerleader skipping meals, about the swimmer skipping meals. It tends to be more of a skip meal issue, particularly for the female child, a skip meal for the athlete that's trying to cut weight in terms of the weight class athlete. This is where for the athlete, we actually will go back and actually use the caloric balance issues and the need to have the fuel sources available for the energy necessary to do the competition, where we can actually sit down and look at what happens to my numbers, what happens to my ability to perform when I am excessively restrictive in my diet, when I'm not eating all the foods that I need in order to get the energy for doing the sport, for doing the activity, and the nutrients necessary to recover and build and grow following that activity. And we can use that data, we can use those numbers as a justification for reinforcing the need to eat. But we also have to look at doing and dealing with the balance points of that psychological stress, of that social stress, as it relates to meal times for the athlete, for the individual who needs the nutrients, needs the energy sources to do the competitions. And that's where we might want to look at reestablishing peer groups within the school site, particularly in and around meal times. But it goes beyond just the athletes, particularly when we start getting into the tween age, into the adolescent age, where they start doing a lot of body image comparison, even though a lot of that body image comparison is going to start very early on. There is an indication amongst a lot of people about kids being the most honest of all of us in terms of how readily they're willing to give opinions. And one of the opinions that they will readily give is, does the person look fat? Does the person appear to be out of shape? Does the person appear to be unfit? Ideas that get established at home and get reinforced at the school site based off of how the educators are projecting body image and body weight to the children. And this comes into play, particularly when we start looking at how kids will start to interact with each other and form peer groups within the school site based off of what are they doing, what are they eating, what do they look like, how do they behave in and around each other, as well as what types of social interactions and social cues do each of the kids get as it relates to what they should or should not be doing in terms of activity, in terms of eating, in terms of all the other things that deal with the pro health. And so that's one of the big issues. Or actually, really, that's the biggest issue if we start looking at the kid-to-kid interaction. The other issue that comes into play here is the modeling behaviors that individuals on the school site happen to have and the expression of implicit biases that those individuals have towards specific pro-health attitudes or pro-health behaviors. And this is coming from findings that we had in our studies that was published in 2023 related to K-12 educators that we surveyed in terms of their ability to establish a pro-health attitude. That came from conversations that I had with a few of the students who were working with me about why is it that their on-site health person is only basically saying, we're going to do yoga, we're going to do this diet, we're going to do this one stress management technique in order to be a healthy school, in order to be a healthy work site. And it kind of led us down a pathway looking at the issues of bias in terms of projection, bias in terms of selection, looking at various types of logical fallacies within arguments that are being made as relates to what can establish pro-health behaviors within the school. One of the things that came out of that study is the fact that educators are very, very bad at selecting appropriate body image for healthiness. The other thing that came out of the study is that educators are very bad in terms of how they go about communicating with individuals that might project having a weight issue. They're very bad in terms of the ability to counterbalance arguments based off of a implicit bias that they don't have the power to make changes. They don't have the power to model correct behaviors, that the home life has a greater impact on overall student health and overall student healthy behaviors than the school site has. Which, if you actually look at it in terms of the amount of time that is there, this is something that came out of a 2015 study that I published doing a meta-analytical analysis of how we go about doing lifestyle changes for adolescents who happen to be overfat, that happen to have metabolic issues. It doesn't matter what the child does. It doesn't matter what the adolescent does in terms of diet or exercise, in terms of causing weight loss, in terms of correcting metabolic issues. They all work the same. But if we combine that with other studies that I've worked on that looked at the coercion versus self-selection and the willingness to do exercise, the willingness to be involved with activity, there has to be something there that it has a positive reinforcer. If without that positive reinforcer, there is no indication for continuous use of the healthy behavior. And this is where we have to start looking at how can we model the behaviors that we want to model? How can we kind of nip in the bud the behaviors that we do not want modeled within the school? Because once again, the children are spending an exorbitant amount of time at the school, around their peers, around their educators. And those individuals have an exorbitant amount of power on establishing a pro-health mentality for the children, an ability to have a global holistic approach to health, an understanding of the various nuances that might exist within diet, within exercise, the ability to have an appropriate self-selection so you do not have an aversion to later on in life. And that's the whole key here as we start looking at this idea about the school site, is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish something that will not lead to aversion. And it goes back to some of the peer pressure issues and a lot of the bullying issues that we see taking place, where the bullying issues will lead to psychological scars, and those psychological scars will lead to aversions later on in life, and those aversions later on in life will lead to poor attrition rates in terms of continuous use of behaviors that are deemed to be pro-health. Something that becomes even ever more important given all of the influence that social media has, that peer groups have on the kids, on the teens, on the adolescents, on the children, as it relates to what types of activities are you going to do, what types of activities are you going to avoid based off of the psychological adherence that you might have due to the bombardment of what you should be or should not be doing based off of what you look like. And the voices of authority that are saying, you should do this, you should not do that, you should be this, you should not be that. And all of those psychological influences are going to impart distinct aversion style issues, distinct attraction style issues within the child's psyche that's going to lead to being pro-health or not pro-health throughout their life. And this is where we start looking at all of the various mechanisms that have come into play over the last couple of decades. For school-age children, it's become very important to understand the generalized inverse relationship that exists between level of physical activity, body weight, and overall health. Where for children who are normal weight, they tend to be healthier and they tend to have overall higher levels of relative physical activity. That corresponds with the apparent differences that we see in psychological attraction to most of the exercise recommendations and physical activity recommendations that are being given to children and young adolescents, where they are told, go run, go play outside, go be active doing endurance things that are more psychologically appeasing for normal weight children than those who are overweight. It's a pattern that, without change in attitude for the recommender, for the authority, can lead to an attitude about physical activity being something to avoid that will continue through adulthood and will lead to a lot of the health issues and disease issues that start to set in during adolescence that get expressed in adulthood for the school-age child that happen to be overweight. These are the programs like the Let's Move, the Just Play attitudes that are out there. The interventions that should serve as a foundation for individuals to pursue lifelong exercise, lifelong activity. However, it's done in such a way that there is a sense of coercion, because for the child that might be overweight or the child that might have a psychological attraction towards specific types of body image or have a psychological issue with their own body image, may give a sense of coercion, a sense that I'm only doing this because I'm being forced to do it. Instead of looking at the self-selection towards distinct exercises that can lead to better use of pro-health behaviors throughout one's life to reduce the overall risk for development of many of the lifestyle diseases, many of the non-communicable diseases that we know we can minimize through lifelong levels of activity. That is, the more active we are throughout the lifespan, the more active we are throughout our lifetime, the less likely we are to have a non-communicable disease. It's an attitude and a pattern that can become troublesome if teachers and staff at the school project biases to children that happen to have weight issues, where they project an attitude that overweight children should be more involved in activities that they would not normally self-select towards, that feel that they are being coerced into doing something instead of self-selecting and wanting to participate. It's issues that lead to much of the confusion for a lot of school-age children, particularly when they get bombarded by adults passing on troves of anecdotal reports or opinions of the various authorities, put quotes around that, about distinct types of things they should be doing in order to be healthy, that get picked up by a whole bunch of different types of media sources that get passed on every day, ignoring the complexity of the issues, ignoring all of the cogwheels that we've talked about, the continuum of the fitness and fatness issues that we've talked about, ignoring all of those issues about how diet and exercise can offer a means to resolve issues related to body weight, related to over fatness, related to the obesity issues that people like to talk about, without understanding the biases that are being projected, without understanding the issues of social and peer pressure and the need to get acceptance, not just from their peers, but also from the adults that they're trying to model after. Many adults miss out on the ability to correctly model what behaviors should be modeled, correctly what pro-health attitudes should be modeled, the appropriate levels of activity, what diets should and should not be utilized in an attempt to be healthy, without understanding that a child's diet and a child's nutrient needs are different than the adult diet and the adult nutrient needs, where they tend to project the ideas of good food, bad food, as opposed to good choice, bad choice. A lot of times the adults at the school site sometimes just don't remember what it's like to be a kid, the need to fit in, the need to be within a peer group, the social and peer pressures that they get blinded to what it was like at that point in time of their life, where most by nature are wanting to fit in with their peer group. The kids are wanting to fit in with their peer group. They want to be the fit kid. They want to be the kid that can do all the stuff that all the other kids within the class are able to do, that they're able to use the activity, able to do the exercise. This doesn't mean that the school should be developing programs, developing resources for the child that is overweight and the child that is fit. It means developing a program that allows all children to find what is enjoyable, to provide recommendations and perspectives without bias, without projecting overt or implicit biases about a distinct type of diet, a distinct type of activity. What we can think about as being a treatment, as being something better than another. The purpose of the interventions, the purpose of the educational perspective here is to establish patterns of behavior that are pro-health, that match pleasant and desirable patterns of thoughts for the child, so that the activities, the diets, the understanding of nutrition becomes self-selected in nature. It serves as a means to get all of the children, all of the adolescents to be more active and be more accepting of pro-health behaviors. It means integrating parents. It means integrating outside of school social networks for the children into the educational process, into the education of the child as it relates to the ideas about diet and nutrition. It means understanding the social pressures that the child has based off of the home life, based off of the cultural norms that are there. And this is where we can start pulling in other aspects of the educational environment that allows for this idea about being pro-health to expand beyond what most people think about as being a physical education issue. Our attempt here is to help children become healthier. We need to remember that an increasing level of general activity is beneficial and is based on the assertion that increased time for physical activity counters the risk for sedentary behaviors. The benefit comes not just from being physically more fit, but also mentally more fit. The rate of improvement becomes excessively powerful when we take into account all of the psychological selections towards exercise that the child has, that the child is willing to engage in. The more pleasing the activity, the more likely they are to use the activity. Each child should be encouraged to select things that they want to do and find most pleasing. This means exposing the children to a host of various types of physical activity. It means trying to minimize the biases that myself as an adult, or the adults at the school site, or the adults in society have towards what is socially acceptable behaviors for the child to be engaged in. In addressing questions about social acceptable behaviors, social acceptable norms, it's important to note that the answers that we're looking at are actually twofold. The first is the issue that is the modeling of behavior. The second issue is what can and cannot be done within the realm of the school day for the benefit of the child's health. They might seem to be independent, however, they are highly intertwined to the point where it's very difficult to assess healthy behaviors without using those two things in tow. What can I model as an educator? What issues are outside of the realm of control at the school? Children tend to learn through modeling, which means that if I'm going to be an educator, I want to project healthy behaviors, I need to model healthy behaviors. If I want to improve health, I have to model behaviors that will improve health. This can simply be walking. This simply can be riding my bike to school, particularly if I happen to be close enough to walk or bike to the school. This could be me spending recess time not in the teacher's lounge, but outside with the students, outside playing. This could be scheduling activity time within normal instruction time. This could be discussing eating healthy, put quotes around that, foods. This could be talking about making good food choices. Simple changes in behavior that can lead to changes in the child's behavior simply based off of how we model. Discussing health goals with the students, establishing health goals, establishing ways that we can be healthy in order to reach those health goals, utilizing a combined effort of modeling both at the school site as well as at the home as it relates to those healthy behaviors. That's where we have to look at that second issue. The fact that there are issues outside of the school that we have to worry about as it relates to the health issues for the children and issues that we can mitigate. This is where we look at how can we organize extracurricular activities for the community. This is where we can encourage playtime for the children, playtime that is self-selected for the children, where they can use what they want to use, where they can do what they want to do, both within the school day as well as outside the school day. We're not talking about formal play. We're talking about informal play. And this informal play has kind of lost a lot of momentum in terms of use, mostly due to litigation issues or fear of litigation issues should injury occur. Children who have free playtime, children who have informal physical education time, are able to develop rules of play. By developing rules of play, they learn how to cognitively work through problems. They learn conflict resolution skills that they do not learn through formal play, through regulated play. The other thing that informal and non-regulated play tends to have impact on is issues related to attention deficit and behavioral outburst issues. Children who have progressive amounts of playtime tend to have better behavioral outcomes in structured class. Not only do they have better behavioral outcomes in structured class, regardless of any neurodivergence that is diagnosed, there is improved academic performance. This is where we can incorporate activity time, non-formal, non-regulated activity time within class instruction time that doesn't necessarily take away from what should be seen as instruction time. That is, we're not doing this at the detriment for academic performance or intellectual achievements. The goal here, once again, is to help the student become healthy. And by helping the student become healthy, we can instill a pro-health attitude throughout the lifespan, throughout the life for the individual. There are just a few simple recommendations that we should be able to follow that can make the school site a leverage point for healthiness. The first one is to encourage the use of activity and exercise within the school day. The second is to model the behaviors that we want the students to do in order to lead to long-term health gains and ensuring pro-health behavior throughout the lifespan. The third is to allow students to self-select towards a specific exercise, a specific activity, or a specific sport that they find most pleasing. To this point, also teach students to be encouraging and supportive of each other in their exercising. And this goes into the idea about that peer pressure and the social pressures that the students are undergoing, that are engaged in, that can lead to aversions for some students to not want to select towards specific things. Help students set health goals and use treats to reward performance, leading to those goals. The idea about rewarding, the idea about using treats is very important, particularly if we're trying to coach or use sports to improve health. The idea about treats or the idea about rewards for performance can have a coercive effect, which means that the student's doing things simply to get the reward or get the treat, or avoid getting punished. And that's where, as a coach or as someone involved with sports, you want to make sure you're not using physical activity as a punitive measure. You want the activity to not be seen as punishment. You want the activity to be seen as rewarding in itself, where secondary treats such as verbal praise will offer a positive reinforcer for continual use of that activity. Allow the exercise and physical activity to be self-selective and non-coercive. It goes back to that idea about looking at how we are setting up our reward system. The end of our actions is to encourage the child to be active, encourage the child to be inquisitive about diet and nutrition, to find what is most rewarding for them, to find what is most appeasing to them. Understanding that using instruction time for physical activity will not only serve as a prevention for later health issues, but is highly assistive in learning and memory, highly assistive in mastery of content being covered. And it has to deal with changes within the brain based off of changes in hormone circulations following doing activity. But just as important as all of those, we have to watch out for negative peer pressures. We have to watch out for the bullying. We have to be able to step in when we start seeing bullying taking place. A lot of people talk about fat shaming issues coming into play here when we talk about the bullying. It's the body image bullying. It's the body weight bullying. We have to provide encouragement to those who are being bullied. We have to stop those who are being the bulliers. We have to stop those who are being the tormentors. By stopping those tormentors, by encouraging those who are being bullied to overcome that bullying, they can reset any of those negative connotations, any of those negative psychological stresses that can have an adverse effect on their long-term health. One of the main points that is within the books that we are currently working on, that is part of the GoFundMe project that we're looking for funding, that's hopefully going to allow us to publish those books and publish resources for schools free of charge. Because if we can stop the bullying, if we can overcome the weight bullying, if we can start to have a pro-health attitude within schools, we can start having a pro-health attitude within our communities, within our cities, within our counties, within our states, and within our country. It's that pro-health attitude that we're trying to establish. That is why the school can be used as a leverage point to get our kids to be healthy, and so much more. Thanks for listening. Please feel free to go back and re-listen to earlier discussions on this as we talked about what can and cannot take place within the school and the issues of biases for those at the school site. Links are going to be in the description. Please click on the link to the GoFundMe and please support us as much as you can as relates to getting this work out. If you're liking what we're putting out there, please make sure you give us that big 5-star rating, give us that big thumbs up, tell us that we're doing a good job. Please make sure you're following us here on the podcast as well as on the YouTube channel, the written stuff in Substack, as well as the quick takes on Instagram and on Threads. If you have comments, please make sure you're leaving it. We're more than happy to discuss those at any future discussion. Please stay tuned for future discussions on all of the various aspects of how the human body works and the misconceptions that are out there as relates to how our body works and how we can become healthy.